Have you ever wondered why so many people prefer to be accepted rather than to be free? Why some bow their heads even when they know they're right? And why there are those who, even after being betrayed, remain loyal like dogs who lick the hand that hurts them? It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Machiavelli whispered this to the world centuries ago, but few dared to truly listen, because this idea is uncomfortable. It dismantles everything we were taught about kindness, virtue, and coexistence. They taught us to smile, to please, to apologize even for things we did not do. But deep down, hasn't that education domesticated us? Isn't what we call kindness often just fear in disguise? Maybe you felt it, that sensation that the more you yield, the less they respect you, that the more you try to be good, the more invisible you become, as if the world had a radar, not for the just, but for the dangerous. And if it's true that toothless kindness is irrelevant, then why do we keep being trained like dogs? That's where this conversation begins. Not a lesson, not a sermon, but a whispered exchange between two survivors of a world that rewards the docile but worships the dominant. Let's talk about what you feel but may never have had the courage to name. About the invisible collar many wear around their necks. About the day you decided to be good and started to disappear. On this journey, we're going to strip away the skin of the domesticated dog and face the wolf hiding beneath it, because kindness is not weakness, but believing that kindness alone will save you. That is, there is a subtle, almost imperceptible moment when a man stops being whole and becomes merely useful. He doesn't notice when it happens. In silences, in a yes said when he wanted to say no, in an unfulfilled expectation, in a compliment sought with desperate eyes. Without realizing, he starts wagging his tail. The metaphor of the dog is not just zoological, it is psychological. It speaks of the insatiable desire to please, the addiction to approval, that impulse that makes a man lower his shoulders, hide his anger, smile even when he's despised. This gentle creature is what society calls civilized, but on the inside, it reeks of fear. From childhood we are taught that being good is being loyal, that being loyal is being obedient, and that obedience is a virtue. But no one teaches us the difference between virtue and submission, because if they did, maybe we would notice the trick. The loyalty they sell us is not honor, it is a collar disguised as a medal. Look around you, observe the environments you frequent, your workplace, your family, your relationships. Notice who is most respected. It is not the kindest, nor the most loyal. It is those who know how to say no, who do not ask permission to exist. Those who, even in silence, radiate a presence that does not ask, but commands. The man who lives to please, who seeks to be loved at any cost, does not inspire confidence, he inspires pity. And pity, my friend, is the opposite of respect. He who bows too much becomes a rug, and no one offers a throne to a rug. The image of the dog is convenient for the powerful, because the dog does not question, the dog serves. And, most tragically, the dog believes that by serving it will be rewarded with eternal love. But the love offered to those who kneel is always conditional. It lasts until the day the dog bites, hesitates, or grows old. You've seen this in the company that discards loyal employees when they're no longer useful, in the friend who disappears the moment you start to disagree, in the partner who walks away when you become unpredictable. Because loyalty, when not paired with autonomy, becomes a trap. You enter it for love and only escape through trauma. Dogs bark, but they will never bite the hand that feeds them. That is the unwritten rule of the modern world, and that is exactly why so many men grow up kind, but fragile, polite, but disposable, educated, and absolutely forgettable. The question that will not go away is this: why do we keep believing that being nice is enough? Don't we see that docility without assertiveness is like a body without a skeleton, soft, curved, incapable of supporting anything beyond its own dependence? The dog that lives waiting for commands does not know what to do alone. He does not hunt, he does not think, he does not act, he only waits. And when the master does not return, he dies, not of hunger or cold, but of uselessness. Maybe you are feeling that silent anguish of no longer knowing who you are because you spent your entire life trying to become what others would approve of, as if your existence were an endless audition, as if every day was yet another attempt to be chosen. But let me tell you something that perhaps no one else has told you so bluntly. He who lives waiting to be chosen has already placed with himself in the position of an object, and objects have no will, only a function. Maybe that's why you're exhausted, not from the struggle, but from the absence of one. Because the dog does not fight, he begs, and that is where true transformation begins. The moment you look inside and recognize, the dog still lives in me, but he needs to die. Not to make way for brutality, but for freedom. Because only a free being can truly choose to whom to be loyal and when to stop being. They applauded you when you were gentle, they smiled when you yielded. They said you were easy to get along with, and deep down you believed that was love. But what nobody told you is that the world has a fetish for people who are easy to control. Society praises kindness, not out of nobility, but out of convenience. A gentle man is a predictable gear, functional, harmless. Kindness, when performed, to be accepted, becomes a cell with bars painted gold. You look around and see pats on the back, cordial smiles, dinner invitations, and you think you've won. But all of this is just the varnish of an emotional captivity. At any moment, if you say no, all these gestures vanish. Because in the theater of obedience, the leading role is reserved for the one who never improvises. You cannot leave the script. You must smile at the right moment. Stay silent when things get uncomfortable. And if you're too firm, you're labeled aggressive. If you dare to disagree, you're ungrateful. If you put yourself first, you're selfish. This is the play you have been performing for years, and maybe you no longer even know where the mask ends and the real face begins. You apologize when you don't need to. You say it's okay when you want to scream. You adjust your tone, your clothes, your presence, your thoughts until they fit into a space that was never yours, and you call this maturity. But tell me, what is left of a man when everything in him is edited to please? True kindness requires strength. It is an act of courage, not of fear. But what we see out there is something else, a kindness addicted to acceptance, a performative virtue shaped by fear of conflict. And it is this fear that destroys you from the inside, the fear of being misinterpreted, of seeming too harsh, of being excluded, of not being loved. And so you spend your life avoiding friction and harvesting resentment. You say yes when you want to say no. You offer your shoulder when you have no strength, even for yourself. And you blame yourself for feeling anger, as if anger were a sin, as if setting boundaries were a crime. But there is something no one told you. Those who most demand your sweetness are the ones who most fear your strength. They know even unconsciously that you are suffocating, and they prefer you to stay that way. Because the man who explodes, the theater becomes unpredictable. And the unpredictable is dangerous, not because he attacks, but because he escapes. Not because he wounds, but because he no longer accepts the supporting role in his own story. Do you want to know what is worse than being hated, being tolerated? That place where you are kept out of convenience, not respect. Where your presence does not bother because it never threatens. Where your absence does not hurt because it never impacted. That is the point where kindness becomes a pact of silence. A contract in which you agree to pay parts of yourself in order to keep being invited to the table. But nobody tells you that the most valuable seats are reserved for those who know when to stand up and leave. You have been conditioned to confuse love with approval. But approval is an empty applause, volatile, cheap. Today you are useful, tomorrow you are noise. The obedience they sell you as virtue is actually an emotional mutation. You start to feel guilty for having your own wants, ashamed for setting limits, anxious for not always being the nice one, and then you get sick. Because there is no more silent suffering than being loved for what you pretend to be and ignored for what you really are. The theater of obedience is not sustained by strength, it is fed by fear. But there is a breaking point, a crack, a gasp between the yes and the no. And when it comes, when you dare to break from the role, the world reacts, and then you discover who was truly with you and who was just using you as a mirror to feel superior. So listen to me now, intimately, like a warning from what still pulses within you. Your kindness does not need to be murdered. It needs to be freed from the collar of approval. It needs to stop being an armor and go back to being a choice. Because only when you stop being nice out of fear can you truly choose to be good. They will tell you that love is the path, that being loved is the greatest achievement, that true leadership comes from empathy, kindness, charisma, and that sounds beautiful. It sounds right until the day you need to say no, until the day you have to close the door and not return, until the day your integrity costs you someone's approval. Then you discover that the world's love is a fragile contract, signed with smiles and undone with silence, that the affection you thought was unconditional always had hidden clauses: be accessible, be malleable, be what I expect. But the wolf does not sign these contracts. He does not move for the affection of others. He moves by conviction, by clarity, by survival. Machiavelli warned us, it is safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. And maybe you interpreted this as cruelty, but it is not about cruelty, it is about freedom. The man who needs to be loved lives, chained to other people's opinions. He measures every word, calculates every step, shrinks to fit, and when he is rejected, he collapses because his identity is not a pillar, but a mirror. But the man who accepts being feared not for brutality, but for presence, this man is free, because he does not beg, he does not justify, he does not negotiate his own limits to fit fragile affections. Being feared is not being hated, it is being respected on the most primal level. It is making people think twice before underestimating you, before lying to you, before betraying you. It is knowing that even if they do not agree with you, no one dares ignore your voice, and yes, this has a cost. You will be misunderstood, called cold, arrogant, harsh. But you know what all these labels have in common? That come from the mouths of those who could not control you. The wolf is solitary not because he rejects company, but because he rejects dependence. He shares space, never submission. And that is why he intimidates, because most people do not know how to live beside someone who does not need their approval. You need to decide what you want to leave in this world, the image of someone pleasant or the memory of someone unshakable. Being loved is pleasurable, but being respected is sustainable. Being liked is ephemeral, but being feared is strategic, because in the end, those who rise to the throne are not the most applauded, but the most unquestionable. And if you think fear pushes people away, remember this: people crave security, and security is born not from affection, but from the certainty that you can protect, and protecting requires teeth, posture, the capacity to face conflict if needed, to bleed if necessary, to do what others hesitate to do if inevitable. The choice between being feared or loved is really a choice between being free or conditioned, between walking with firmness or being pulled by an invisible leash made of compliments. Society will always try to convince you that being feared is a sign of emotional weakness, but this is said by those who never had the courage to be hated for who they truly are. So what are you? The dog who begs for affection, or the wolf who carves his own path through the woods? You can keep letting yourself be shaped to fit everyone's embrace, or you can accept the discomfort of being uncontrollable, not out of pride, but out of lucidity. Because the man who wishes to be loved by all will sooner or later lose himself. But the man who accepts being feared by some finds within himself an authority that no one can grant and no one can take away in the end. The question is not whether they will like you, but whether, even in silence, they will think twice before crossing you. That is the mark of the wolf and the freedom of someone who no longer needs to please to exist. Maybe now, after everything you have heard, there is a strange echo inside you, an uneasiness, a restlessness, as if part of what you believed about being good, being loved, being accepted has begun to crack, and that is good. Because it is in this internal noise that the truth is born, the truth that blind loyalty is not virtue, it is prison, that unquestioned obedience is not nobility, it is fear, and that the man who lives to please ends up wasting his own destiny. You were trained like a dog to wait, to serve, to lick wounds that were not even yours. But at some point you realized that this was not life, it was a performance, and you decided, even if you still don't know how, that it was time to stop asking for permission. The wolf is not the enemy of man, he is the man who survived domestication. He is what is left when the character dissolves. He is what emerges when the need to be loved finally yields to the need to be whole. The question that remains now is not what people will think of you, but what happens when you stop caring. The answer: you finally begin to exist, I remember one particular night. It was around 3 a.m. The world was quiet, but inside me there were screams. I had just been pushed aside in an important decision by people who claimed to admire me. And the worst part, I knew I was right, but I stayed silent, cordial, polite, docile, as always. That night, sitting on the kitchen floor with no strength left even to justify my pain, something changed. I realized my kindness had become a survival, the mechanism, not a truth. And maybe for the first time, I understood that no one would respect me until I respected myself enough to become inconvenient from then on. I did not become a monster, but I stopped being a doormat. And if you have made it this far, if something in this message pierced through you, then maybe it is your time to let the dog die, and to start walking with your shoulders high, even if alone. Because the loneliness of the wolf is hard, but the life of the dog is unbearable. Thank you for listening until the end. You have no idea how much that means. This space is not for the masses, it is for those who are tired of performing and want to touch the raw flesh of ideas. And if you felt that, then you are no longer the same. Now is the time to prove you still have teeth. Like the video or don't. But if you do it with the conviction of someone who acts without asking for permission. Comment down below the moment in your life when you realized you were being trained to please, and subscribe to the channel not because I beg, but because deep down, you know you will need to come back here. By the way, there are 2 videos showing up on the screen right now, but be careful, one of them might change completely the way you see yourself.